Hello, and thanks so much for joining the Invisible Americans podcast with Jeff Madrick and Carol Jenkins. We address the travesty of child poverty here.
There are nearly 13 million children living in serious material deprivation in America, and we don't see them. They are our invisible Americans, and we plan to change that.
A couple of words about us. The podcast is based on Jeff's book, Invisible Americans, The Tragic Cost of Child Poverty. He's an economics writer, author of 7, and co-author of another 4 books on the American economy.
And Carol is an Emmy-winning journalist, activist, and author, most recently president of the ERA Coalition, working to amend the Constitution to include women.
And we are longtime colleagues and friends. In today's episode, we examine child poverty from 2 points of view. What should our government be doing to eliminate the rampant deprivation in the United States? And what can people, indeed, what can other children do to eliminate it as well?
We talk with Nikhil Goyal, the author of Live to See the Day, Coming of Age in American Poverty. It profiles 3 boys trapped in poverty in a Philadelphia neighborhood. And also with Shrusti Amula, who, when she was in 7th grade, started a food recovery nonprofit that is now in place in over 200 schools in her county.
We begin with Nikhil Goyal, a PhD sociologist who was a senior policy advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. In his book, Live to See the Day, he shows how small mistakes by poor kids can turn into a lifetime of damage. He also says we need a Roosevelt-like New Deal, that our government needs to step up. Nikhil, thank you so much for being with us today.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me.
The book is heartbreaking and hopeful. In it, you say that poverty is violence in its essence. If you could tell us about Ryan, Giancarlo, and Emmanuel in terms of the violence in different ways was inflicted on them, these 3 Puerto Rican boys that you followed in Kensington.
I tell the stories of 3 Puerto Rican kids who grew up in the neighborhood of Kensington in Philadelphia. And I start the book off with the story of Ryan Rivera. And this young person goes to a middle school called Grover Washington and gets into some mischief with some of his friends, ends up starting a fire in a trash can in school. And fortunately, the fire was quickly extinguished by a staff member. But instead of that child getting restorative justice or care or counseling, he was interrogated, arrested by the police, and funneled through the juvenile justice system. And then he eventually expelled from his school and sent to a very violent for-profit disciplinary school in the city.
I think he was only in, the 7th grade?
Yes, only in the 7th grade. He was a month shy of turning 13 years old. He was firmly a child. This was a young person.
Exactly.
So I think it illustrates the inhumanity of the juvenile justice system and the criminalization of young people, both by schools as well as by the carceral system. But, the other stories in the book, I think, illustrate as well the violence of poverty and housing insecurity and hunger and gun violence and lacking the basic necessities for a dignified life. I think each of them in their own right have endured enormous struggle and experienced the failings of the safety net and our economy to provide people with a decent standard of living.
What got you interested in this originally, Nikhil? We've been working on child poverty now at least since, I guess, 2016. And I wrote a book called Invisible Americans that called for an unconditional allowance for poor children. What brought you to this topic?
Thanks for mentioning your book. It's an excellent book and one that really, I think, drives home the point of a universal child allowance as one potential solution to the crisis that we face. But I got into this in a couple of ways. One, I've been writing about public education and children for a number of years, and I had been interested in examining the high school dropout crisis. And this was back in 2015, and ended up getting connected to an alternative high school in Philadelphia called El Centro, de Estudiantes, I thought I was going to write a story, interview some students and teachers, and call it a day. But I quickly realized through my reporting at the school that there was a much larger story here. It wasn't sufficient to simply report on the happenings of the school. I really had to examine the school as part of a larger political economy, the neighborhood, criminal justice, housing, social welfare, and other institutions at play in the lives of these children and their families. And so the project ended up turning into a long-term ethnographic study in Kensington. It was part of my graduate studies at the University of Cambridge. And then I turned that study into this book, which focuses on three of the participants in the study who I thought would be very accessible to readers, as well as be able to stand in their own way and capture the history and policies that are affecting children and families across this country.
One of the things you call for, Nikhil, because you spend a substantial amount of time talking about the solutions to all of this, illuminating for us the lives of these three boys and their families. I love the family diagram that you have to do, the mother, the father, the half brother, the relatives that are all engaged in this portrait of poverty. But you talk about solutions, and it seems that you are asking for a Roosevelt-style New Deal for the United States of America. Talk with us about that.
The end of the book really tries to present a blueprint for how we can finally end the crisis of poverty and economic insecurity in the richest country in the history of the world. And I'm a student of the New Deal, of the Great Society, of these periods of time where Americans came together and realized that government could actually be a force for the public good. It can be a force to relieve suffering and inequality. And I think throughout our history, the New Deal is this beacon of hope and shows us what we can do if we put adequate resources and with the vision and political will to accomplish serious problems. So I call for a series of changes in policies. One that Jeff had referenced earlier, a universal child allowance. We had in 2021, as part of the American Rescue Plan, the expanded child tax credit, which was a version of universal child allowance and provided every American parent with either $300 or $250 a month per child. And it dramatically reduced child poverty and economic insecurity and food insecurity and other forms of hardship. But I also call for not just the direct cash transfers, but a building up of public goods. We've had decades of privatizing the public sector, whether it's in education, in healthcare, in housing, transit, childcare, among others. I think we really need to provide a public option in these sectors to make sure that people have equitable access to the basic necessities of life. And so when we talk about something like public education, making sure that everyone has a well-funded neighborhood school that their child can attend with wraparound services and health and social supports, well-paid teachers, restorative justice, universal free school meals. Schools should be the anchor of the community and a place where children can be and be safe and be nurtured. And in many communities, it is frankly the last remaining social welfare institution. We've decimated community health centers, and we've decimated after school and summer programs and jobs programs, among other programs. But schools are frankly the one standing institution that care for children. So I think what I call for is a New Deal style agenda to provide these economic goods and rights for everyone, and to really show that if we did it in the 1930s, if we did it in the 1960s, and if we did it during the pandemic, we can do it once again and end the scourge of poverty and insecurity.
Well, your book is very well written and persuasive. And as you might suspect, I would agree with much of it. Though a lot of people are looking for independent childcare services that are independent of school, of course, or supplement school. But where's the money going to come from? And this is not an argument I like, but it's an argument that's made, and that's why the darn child tax credit was discontinued. So what do you think? How do we do that? How do we convince people that child poverty is a priority. I know when I first looked into it, I couldn't believe how little Americans cared about child poverty.
The question of how we pay for these programs is one that I think we should acknowledge and talk about openly, because it's one that the media has seized on. You and I have cited the National Academy study, which has found that the annual cost of child poverty ranges from $800 billion to $1.1 trillion. That is an enormous amount of lost money each and every year in the form of higher spending on public assistance programs, in the form of higher crime and social dislocation, lower economic productivity. This affects all of us as Americans, whether you're poor, middle class, or well off. So that to me is the first argument that I present to folks, that this costs all of us, and ending child poverty will benefit you whether or not you live in those dire and desperate conditions. And then the second point I would make is how we pay for this. When we worked on Build Back Better legislation in 2021, we had pay-fors for each and every one of our programs, whether it was raising taxes on the largest and most profitable corporations in this country, whether it was making sure that the wealthiest Americans were paying a little bit more in tax and their fair share, whether it was ending these tax loopholes like the carried interest loophole, which just enriches hedge fund managers and some of the wealthiest Americans in this country at the expense of all of us. There are a series of tax reforms and changes that can be made to rebalance the distribution of tax structures and to help pay for a number of these programs. And even without those programs, just investing in the programs I mentioned will pay for themselves in the long haul in reducing crime, reducing lack of productivity, and reducing public spending on some of these assistance programs, among other things.
Yeah, Nikhil, you lament in the book about what happened to Build Back America as project after proposal got whittled down to next to nothing. I would belong to a group of women working in the women's space. And as each of the things that they wanted and needed got rejected, there was this sense of hopelessness that overcame us all, I suppose. So what do we put in place to prevent that from happening again? It's the numbers game that so far we're not winning.
I think that's very apt, and one that I would agree with. I would also just mention and acknowledge that when we were working on Build Back Better, we had 49 Senate Democrats on board with $3.5 trillion, or almost the entirety of that piece of legislation. And that is, a massive sea change from just a few years earlier. I don't think you would have been able to propose legislation of that scale in, say, 2015 or even 2016 or 17 and get the same number of Democrats in the Senate on board with that. And then virtually everybody in the House except one member in the Democratic Party on board. So I think that is a great achievement. It makes me hopeful for when there is a trifecta in Washington, when Democrats can control both chambers and the presidency, that there will be an opportunity to actually finish the unfinished business of Build Back Better and other legislation. There's enormous lobbying from corporate interests against many of these provisions, from private equity who did not want to see, affordable public childcare, among other programs. I'm hopeful that the country is recognizing the need and necessity for these programs. You will see that urgency captured and capitalized on by states around the country who have recognized that there's paralysis in Washington. Washington is not going to solve our problems, at least in the near future. We're going to invest in the safety net and in social democratic programs. New Mexico, Minnesota, California, Oregon, Washington State, states all over this country that are adopting the programs that did not pass in 2021.
And even adopting child allowances as well.
Yes.
Is there anything more we can do? I like to say it's education of the public, but I guess it's more than that. They seem to be incredulous about all these ideas. Poverty has always been a difficult issue. I mean, literally always in America. I'm not asking you really to give us the solution, but I thought you might think about it. You might have thought about it a little more.
Well, I mean, I would answer that, partially by talking about messaging. Poverty is in the title of the book. and it's a topic I certainly explicitly state and talk about. But I also think it could be helpful to talk in a broader sense about affordability. People are, whether you're low income or middle income, you are dealing with the affordability crunch in housing and childcare, in healthcare, in virtually every part of life. And so talking about how this vision is going to reduce the cost of living, not just poverty, but reduce the cost of living, I think is a powerful message that can convince people who may not necessarily care about people living in poverty, but care about middle income people. So I think there's a way to talk about this in a broader sense. And I think one of the tragedies of the child tax credit's demise was that a lot of people didn't realize, there was a lot of talk about reducing child poverty and not enough talk about the fact that it made middle income families more economically secure, that they didn't have to worry as much about their bills for that period of time when it was implemented. So I think that those on messaging, that would be my recommendation to policymakers and activists.
Well, I think everybody who contributed to Build Back Better deserves congratulations. That includes you and President Biden. And Build Back Better partly was reducing costs of conventional urgent expenses, such as Medicare and so forth. Is the message getting through? Is the administration doing enough to get the message through?
I think the president has made some important public speeches over the past couple of months about Bidenomics and the need for a robust economic agenda that will address the needs of working families. And I think there's, the challenge obviously is one, getting through the noise and making sure that message sticks. And then two, I think the affordability crisis, to reiterate, is one that unfortunately has not been dramatically addressed in the past 2 years, especially in some of those key sectors because of the demise of Build Back Better. So it's difficult, I think, for the president and Democrats to craft a message at times when some of those programs did not ultimately reach the finish line. But I think the message about how do we actually go after corporate power and corporate interests that are raising costs, raising inequality, and economic insecurity, going after creating, this kind of villain narrative about who are the people that are causing the pain and suffering in American society. It's not the people at the bottom, it's the people who run these corporations and the people at the very, very top. I think the message of that would be very helpful. And the president has certainly engaged on that. And I think the strength of the rejuvenated labor movement is a testament to that message and the political conditions that we exist. So I think leaning into the great power of the labor movement as well is one that I think can hopefully convince voters and workers across the country.
That's a pretty clear sign of hope.
I agree.
Nikhil, thank you so much for being with us, for your story of the three boys, for your solutions, and for your hope.
Thanks to both of you for all your work over many decades, and appreciate the engagement with the book.
And we need more books.
So get writing the next one, Nikhil. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Shrusti Amula of Montgomery County, Maryland, is a high school senior now, believe it or not, applying to college. But she was 13 years old, a seventh grader, when she founded the Rise and Shine Foundation in 2019.
She noticed how much food was being thrown away at her school and started a food recovery plan that redirects food to the hungry, and a composting program that redirects waste so it doesn't affect the climate. Here's what's possible for each of us to do. Shrusti, thank you so much for joining us today. Just so that we can get some idea, tell us about yourself. You're a senior in high school now and have been an anti-poverty worker for many years.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm a senior in high school, and I founded the nonprofit Rise and Shine Foundation, and our main goal is to reduce food waste in our community, and we do that through composting and food recovery programs. We also try to help student volunteers in our community and help promote leadership.
It's quite a bit, and you've been rewarded and awarded for the work. How did you come to this work?
Our county holds an agricultural fair every single year. And then one year, my parents and I went, and we were listening to someone talking about the negative environmental footprint of food waste. And I was just so shocked because I think me at that time and a lot of other people just throw away food, and we don't really think about the negative environmental aspect of it, or we know we shouldn't throw away food, but no one really understands that's like the third largest contributor to climate change. And I wanted to bring light to that because if I know that I didn't know that, and I know a lot of other people don't know that. So that's how I got inspired to do all the work that I'm doing right now.
Did you know that a lot of your peers would be curious about that? But were you worried they wouldn't be, even though you brought it to their attention?
Honestly, in the beginning, I was a little bit worried just because like students don't really pay attention to like small things like this a lot of the time. Like even in our county, recycling is such a big widespread thing that everyone knows, but even people in schools aren't recycling, right? So I was a little bit worried on that part. But once we actually got the program running, we also have like an educational aspect to our programs that basically takes 2 weeks before we even start the programs in the schools to teach students about it. And they actually catch on really, really well, especially the elementary schoolers. Instead of just being bored or confused by it, they're so excited to get started, and they really love that they're able to like save the planet. So I was worried in the beginning, but now I think it's been turning out really well, and they've been taking it really well.
Was your goal to save the planet?
I hope so. I hope to, yeah.
Well, you're well on your way to doing it. Tell us about the postcard campaign.
Yeah, the postcard campaign was in support of a House and Senate bill, and that was created. We ran it for 2 years, and basically an overview of the bills. It was inspired by the first composting program I started in 2018. And after seeing what a significant impact it's having on reducing food waste, because at that point we were collecting around 2,000 pounds of food in a single month from an elementary school, which is relatively smaller compared to like the average high school even. But after seeing the amount of food waste we're collecting from the schools and what a big impact it was having on the environment, it inspired state legislators to create and eventually pass a bill to fund composting programs to run in Maryland schools. And then the first year, I think we got around 6,000 people from across Maryland to handwrite postcards in support of the bill. And that helped the bill eventually get passed. And then last year we ran it again, and we got the support of an additional 11,000 Marylanders, and we were able to get funding for that bill. So now we have $250,000 over 5 years to support composting programs in schools in Maryland.
Just quickly, how does your composting program work?
So basically what we do is right now in the school cafeteria, we have a trash can and the recycle bin, and we just add an additional green bin for food waste. So all students really have to do for the composting program itself is instead of throwing away their food waste in a trash can, they're just putting it into a separate bin. And then I am in contact with the hauler who picks up the food waste from the schools once a week, and then he takes it to his own facility to turn it into compost.
That's incredible. I keep saying incredible because we're so impressed. I mean, your organizing skill, bills, in the legislature, and creating this. And talk to us about the food waste that exists within the schools and how you transport that, whatever is left there, to the hungry who need it. How do you get that done?
Food recovery is a program we started a little bit after composting, and we realized the main reason we thought about the program is because after seeing the composting, we see the students are catching on really, really well. We also realize a large amount of the food that the students are trying to compost is completely unopened, uneaten food. And then after that, we realized, like, especially after COVID, there's so many people who are fighting food insecurity, and we can be helping alleviate their problem. So that's how I came up with the idea with food recovery. And then we opened that in schools and businesses, but they run a little bit differently in each one. In the businesses, we're in contact with different businesses, including Panera, Crumble Cookies, and even pick up food from grocery stores such as Wegmans. And we collect both perishable and non-perishable foods that they would have otherwise thrown away because they often throw out food before it actually goes bad. And we donate that to people fighting food insecurity through homeless shelters and food pantries. And then we were trying to take this exact same program to schools, And the main idea was that we know students are trying to throw away or compost a large part of what they're not eating during lunch. So we're going to take those unopened items and donate them to homeless shelters. And that was the main idea we actually had. But it actually didn't turn out the way we wanted or the way we expected. Instead, I had a better result because the way we run food recovery is we have a mini fridge for the perishable foods and a share cart for the non-perishable foods. And students put their food on that during the lunch period. But a lot of the times, like for some students, their lunch period would be like at 10:30 and no one's going to be hungry for lunch at that time. So students are able to go throughout the day and grab food off these two places. So we actually found that students are taking the food and there is no food left at the end of the day or even at the end of the week. So it's good that the food is getting redistributed within the own school because that's who it's intended for in the first place.
And do you think that's because of lack of funds or why do you think that happens during the day? The students are clearly hungry.
To some degree, it's because, like as I mentioned, some students' lunches are like 10:30 or 11, and it's really early, and people just don't want to eat lunch at that time. But also, a big part of it is that our school days are long, it's tiring, it's straining, and people just, I guess, are hungry by the end of the day. Also, we also found that it's really helpful for both food shy and food insecure students because maybe they don't want to grab something or eat during lunch in front of everyone, or maybe they need it to take home at the end of the day because they don't have enough food at home. So they're able to get it off those too.
Is your school a relatively middle class school, or is it a little bit more poor than middle class?
I don't necessarily know how to explain it, but at least in our county, we give each school a farm percentage. And the farm percentage is basically people who qualify for free and reduced meals and aren't able to afford full meals. So it ranges from like schools with like almost like 3, 4 farm rate percentages, which means that they're like relatively higher class. And then some schools are like 80, 70% farm rate. So they're like relatively lower class. So it has a wide range.
How many schools are you doing this in now, Shrusti?
For the composting program, we're running it at 12 schools right now. And the food recovery program, we were actually able to get partner with our county public school system. And now it's going to be like mandatory to run this program. So that's going to be in all 211 schools by this June.
That's great. Have you read about child poverty before you saw composting in action, child hunger and so forth?
Yeah, to like some extent, like everyone knows it's a huge issue, but especially after COVID, I was really able to see like people that I know or people in our community directly impacted by it, even like close to home it is. And now that with the work I've been doing to fight food insecurity, it's been like a really mind-blowing experience because like I'm really lucky that my family hasn't been through that. And obviously this is like a set of experiences that I would have never been able to see otherwise. So it's just been an interesting experience to like meet people with a different set of life experiences that haven't been as lucky as I have. And I'm able to directly help them in any way that I can and connect with them that way.
I read recently that you are filling out college applications. How's that process going?
It's been kind of good. I actually just submitted my first one last night.
And what do you plan to major in?
Political science.
Aha. Are you planning to run for office yourself?
I really hope to in the future, yeah.
Thank you so much for all the work you do and for telling us about your programs, legislation, food recovery, food distribution. Really a lot of great work for you not having graduated from high school yet. Tell us how old you were when you first went to that exhibit and learned about the composting.
I started my first composting program when I was in 7th grade. So around 12 or 13 years old. And then I opened the nonprofit a year later.
Ah, so you had a nonprofit in the 8th grade, right? That is amazing. And I tell you, we really thank you for showing what can be done and what students can do as well to participate in alleviating child poverty. Thank you for tremendous work.
Yeah,
And for recognizing people who are less fortunate than you. I think that's what America needs most.
yeah. if you're in the position to help people, I feel like you should be doing that.
Thanks, Shrusti.
Thank you.
History will judge a nation's decency in various ways. One of them will surely be the well-being of all its children. American neglect of its poor children is both inexplicable and deplorable. By basic measures, it has the highest child poverty rate among rich nations in the world. A generation of careful academic research has shown how damaging this has been to children's cognition, health, nutrition, and future wages. We are dedicated to restoring a bright and optimistic future for all children in this land long celebrated for equal opportunity.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Invisible Americans podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. But we urge you to visit our website for transcripts, show notes, research, and additional information about our guests and their work. That's www.theinvisibleamericans.com. Please follow us on social media and our new YouTube channel. And our blog posts are up on Medium as well as our website. That's www.theinvisibleamericans.com. Jeff and I will see you the next time.